to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason. I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Jody Lynn can't join us today. She's working the family farm stand for the next couple of weeks, so we're going to be doing the show without her presence for the next 2 episodes, which is a little sad. But fortunately, today's going to be a lot easier than it could have been because we have a former guest returning after it's only been like a month or something like that.
You were pretty quick to get me back. I liked that. It felt very complimentary.
Well, it felt great. I mean, when you were interviewed with me and Jody Lynn, we both agreed like we got to get her back.
Oh,
because it was that kind of a vibe. It was it was exactly that kind of vibe, you know?
Yeah. Well, you're right. It's the idea that we were just saying this a little bit before we started, sometimes it just clicks and the conversation flows and it's so effortless. And it's like, those are the guests you want back. Those are the hosts you want to talk to. And I think it helps when you have people who are also on the other side of the mic frequently, because then it brings us all together with this shared experience of like, we host, but we also are, sometimes in the hot seat, and it's a good change of dynamic.
Yeah. So I actually haven't said who you are. I mean, people perhaps probably saw it in the title of the episode, but Nikki Croce of the Who the Fuck podcast is joining me once again. And like you said, we were talking before we got started here about the connection aspect to what we do. How, in fact, we were sharing how there was a period of time where each of us were doing 2 podcast episodes a day, which is intense. Yes. It's a really intensive thing to do, but the connections that come out of that are really cool. And it's a great example of how powerful connection is in our lives.
Yes. And how powerful conversation is, because I feel like one of the things that I'm learning on my journey is I have to lean into this part of myself that is so passionate about conversation, so passionate about connection, but it also requires me to look back at parts of my life where I was told, like, you talk too much, or you need to kind of rein it in, right? And it's like, so trying to play to your strengths, which may have previously been seen as weaknesses or perceived to be, something that you shouldn't have or shouldn't do, and really allowing that to flourish. And I think, you have a similar energy where it's like, you want to have the conversations because you know that doing that will give you a stronger sense of community and connection and relatability. And it doesn't matter that you've had drastically different life experiences sometimes, because I find that often it's the little details that surface in conversations that you find a lot of connectivity around.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I totally agree with that. And in fact, in my own experience, I actually was not one of those people who talked too much. I was one of those people who hid in the corners. I was like the ultra introvert. And to give you an idea, my high school class had a reunion a few years back, and at the reunion, they take a picture and so forth. And so we're posing for the picture, and I find myself standing in front of the woman who was the most popular girl in the class, by everybody's imagination. And she turns to me and she says, "I don't remember you being that tall." And my response was, I'm kind of amazed you remember me at all. Because I was kind of hidden in the shadows.
I love that you just brought that up too, Walt, because I've actually been thinking a lot about this recently in the last couple of days. I always feel like, I think we may have talked about this the last time, just sort of the idea of divine timing and there not really being coincidences and things.
Right.
And I think I'm on this part of my life path where I'm recognizing the things that are holding me back are these insecurities that I had from when I was younger. And this idea that, I played sports, so I wasn't super unpopular, but I also wasn't like this really popular person who, because I was kind of the hybrid of like a nerd jock, where it was like, I was very much like, I want to talk about my feelings. I'm going to express myself, but then I'm also going to like go on the field or the court and put it all out there. And so I think as I've developed into who I am now, I look at it and I'm like, okay, well, there's this insecurity in the space that existed between those two things that was like, do people like me? Or it feeling like maybe because I was bullied when I was younger, or just that I hopped around friend groups a bit. And it's like, well, what was it back then that made me feel so insecure? Because my wife and I were looking through my yearbook and she's like, baby, you're like the most attractive person in class. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I feel like you're very biased. And she's like, no, like, just like look. And I'm like, okay, and not trying to be like, oh, praise me, look at how good looking I am. Although to be fair, when I was younger, I did say that, and I was like, but
Did you really?
it was the mask. It was like the yeah, no, no, I'm incredibly certain I'm good looking. Like no, it's
I
like
love
fake
it
it till
though.
you make it kind of thing.
Yeah, well, hey,
Um,
there's nothing wrong with that approach. That's a great approach.
but it's like I didn't really believe it, and then so I'm looking back at this yearbook with my wife, and I'm thinking, what was it that like made me so insecure? Because it wasn't like, oh, I'm so categorically unattractive that people won't like want to even look in my general directions. Okay, so it's not that. And going through enough therapy, I can tell you, it's like I was closeted, I was hiding myself for a good portion of my life. And so now that I'm in this adult part of my life where those insecurities still exist, but the origin of those insecurities has sort of been leapfrogged.
Yes,
It's like I got out of
I
it,
know what you mean. Yeah, sure.
right? And so it's
Yeah.
like if you were this introverted person and you're like, I don't know, I don't expect people to notice me. I think like, gosh, I wonder what people really thought of me when I was in high school. Because my perception of me in high school was like, I carried a lot of shame and anxiety about that growing
Mm,
up. And
hmm.
now I look at it, I'm like, what was I so insecure about? You know? And it's like, did other people see that? And was my lack of confidence part of what made me feel like I didn't belong?
They're good questions. One of the things that one of my friends pointed out to me recently is that we think a lot about what other people are thinking about us, when in fact they're almost never thinking about us at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they're thinking about themselves or what other
That's
people think
right.
about them. Totally.
But isn't that
Totally.
what we do, right? I mean, we're constantly worried about what, what does he think? What does she think? Oh God, I just embarrassed myself. I can't believe I did that.
Well, the shame
And
of embarrassment is like a real thing that I held on to when I was younger too,
mhm,
because I think I saw it as very reflective of who I was. So if this moment happens and you're embarrassed by it, it's like I clung to that shame and I look
mm,
back on it and I'm like, gosh, how much different could my life have been if I just allowed myself some grace and was just like, this was a very human moment, like move on from it.
mhm.
But we weren't growing up with that mindset. I can tell you I wasn't as a millennial. And I imagine knowing that you're older than I am, that like that was probably even less of the thought of like, give yourself grace, don't hold on to that, right? Like we weren't talking about those things.
Not so much little as not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the tail end of the baby boomer generation. The baby boomer generation was the most unsophisticated internal conversation generation that existed,
Oh my gosh. I
because
love that you just said
we
that.
we just didn't do that. Yeah, well, first of all, you were discouraged from doing so.
Hmm.
I mean,
Well, especially as a male, right? Like I
oh
imagine
God,
probably
yes.
even more so.
Oh yeah, well that's like that goes with the territory. You almost take that for granted, right?
Yeah.
I think feelings, male, no, sorry, they don't go
Yeah.
together. The only feelings you're allowed are to be really excited at a sporting event or to be really angry because somebody dissed you. That's about it.
I thought I was like excited. The fact that you brought that first, I was like, the next one has to be anger. It has
Of
to be.
course, yeah. They're the only two you're allowed to have. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. Well, so when you think about that and like how you grew up, do you feel like what was the kind of the turning point for you where you allowed yourself to go a little bit more inward?
The fact that I was an introvert. Seriously. I mean, we've been talking as if these are challenges that we're dealing with, and they were challenges. But like all the different challenges we encounter in life, they also become superpowers over time. They
Yeah.
become the basis for how we grow. And so for me, the growth started mainly because I went inside because I didn't want to be outside.
Mm,
And once I was inside, I didn't really know what to do with it. I didn't have a lot of guidance.
yeah.
I was brought up in a Christian background. They don't really teach you a whole lot about going inside. It's not exactly part of the way it's presented. Um, the society certainly didn't go inside. The only time that you ever went inside with, now of course I grew up during the '60s, which was a very volatile decade, and I actually missed most of the '60s because when I was growing up, I wasn't aware of all the stuff that was going on. I found out I didn't even know Woodstock happened an hour away from where I grew up. I didn't know about
Oh my God. That's crazy.
it.
Just
I
that
mean, seriously,
alone.
I didn't even know it was going on. Well, I mean, I think there was one reference to a traffic jam on the New York Thruway on the
Yeah.
news, and that was it. That's all you ever
It's funny
heard.
because that's kind of it's It's great that that's the one point that you just mentioned too, because my mom had tickets to Woodstock
Oh, really?
and couldn't go because the traffic was so bad she couldn't get there. And I joked around with her. I was like, I'm kind of glad. Like, I feel like it would have been an amazing experience for you to have, and I'm sorry that you missed it. But also, I wonder if like your life path would have gone the same way, and I would even be here if you had ended up at Woodstock. So
That's a
I'll
fair
just take it
point.
as like the universe making things so I could end up here in some
Yeah,
future state.
I think that's a fair point because who knows how it could come out differently. People who did attend, and I have met people who did attend, it was life changing for them.
Yeah.
It was an experience. It's the same kind of experience that people often attribute to the first time they have a drink or the first time they try a drug or the first time that they have sex or something along that line, something that's mind shifting. It was the
Yes.
same kind of experience for people who attended Woodstock. And the stories that come out of course, I mean, you can watch the documentary movie, get an idea of the stories that way. But the personal stories that come out of it, people, they had their own little world that they were living with. Yeah, there were probably 500,000 people there, but they weren't interacting with 500,000 people. They were interacting with 10 or 20.
Right. Totally.
And so that was their Woodstock experience.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's an interesting perspective. I don't it's so interesting because from the objective observer, you see it as sort of this very collective, unified experience, but in reality it was very much like these are the
It
people that
was.
you're with, this is the activity that you're doing together. And I'm
Yeah,
sure plenty of those people didn't know each other and then didn't know each other when they met and then
that's right.
didn't know each other after the fact either.
Exactly.
If they
Yep.
even remembered it. But
If they even remembered it, that's right.
But so you were saying like so you grew up in the 60s
Mhm.
and so like you said it was a volatile time. I mean there was a lot going on. I actually watched a documentary a couple of years ago. It must have been around 2020 because it was called just 1968 or 68 or something.
Mhm.
And so many of the issues are the same.
Oh
And I was
God,
like,
yes.
"Oh God, this is bad. This is like we've learned nothing as
And
humanity."
intensely so.
Mhm.
68 was 67, 68. Well, 67, I was starting to become aware. Of course, we're entering the Woodstock era at that point. 68 was when I was really becoming aware, and I was first made aware by the two assassinations that year, Dr. King and Senator Kennedy, and then later on with the Democratic Convention. And I remember being glued to the television, watching it with my mother, and constantly asking my mother, why are they doing that?
Yeah.
And now my parents were conservative, so and my mom was not particularly politically inclined anyway,
Yeah.
so she really didn't have any good answers for me. She was trying as honestly as she could to give me answers, but she couldn't really give me any
Well,
answers.
and
So,
also they had a limited amount of knowledge coming in too. Like I think an
oh, the
important thing
information was
to
very limited.
the important thing to acknowledge is like if we think news is biased now, what about when you had like one channel to watch?
Well, three actually, but they might as well have been
Okay,
one. And
ABC,
PBS.
CBS. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that's it. Those three and PBS, just to make things. Yeah, that was the educational television,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that was it, and Walter Cronkite was really everybody's. The go-to guy. That was the guy you trusted, and
yes,
for good reason. He was a pretty trustworthy guy, But nevertheless, that was the source. That's
yeah,
where the information came from, and it was filtered through the Walter Cronkite mindset.
yeah,
So it was a role. The '60s, the '70s, the early '80s. It was like it was one great big long extended decade. It wasn't. It was more than 10 years, but it felt like this long period of time. It ran from about 67 to about 84. That
yeah.
was the decade. It was like 17 years, but it was a decade,
It
and that
was
was
the
the Walter
generation,
Cronkite
right?
decade. It was,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So when you were having sort of these moments in your evolution, do you feel like there was a notable shift for you? Because you said you started to kind of pay more attention or see it more overtly in your life, that it started to kind of shift your mindset about like how you were seeing the world also?
It was reinforcing what I was already experiencing in other ways. So 68, I was 11 years old.
Okay.
71, I was 14. At
So
age
you're my dad's
14,
age, so that makes sense. Yeah.
okay. So at age 14, I left the church. And that was a little bit uncomfortable because my parents were the biggest donors of the church. So we were prominent in the church. And I was the oldest son. So it was very, very uncomfortable. But I did something that you weren't supposed to do. I read the Bible cover to cover. And in so doing, I said, oh, wait a minute. They left a few things out here.
Yeah. Right.
And I brought them up, and they didn't appreciate that I was bringing that up. So they pretty much drove me away while I was driving myself away. But anyway, I'd already been going through a questioning process because of that. And so
Hmm.
now all of a sudden these other, these real world situations come into my experience. And for me, it was just a continuation of a theme.
Yeah.
I'm being deceived. Here's more deception. Here's another example of deception. Here's more deception going on. It was an ongoing thing. It's like, is there anything that's real?
Yeah.
Are there any genuine human beings in the world? Which, by the way, was one of my reasons for being so introverted.
Interesting. Okay. So can we pull at that thread a little bit?
Okay.
So,
Essentially, on what? Go ahead. You go. You,
oh
you
no, I
ask.
was just going to say, do you think that that's like, was it partially a defense mechanism then?
Of course. Yeah. And I think we all had defense mechanisms of one type or another because it was kind of a plastic time. It was a time of you made the reference to the mask that you were wearing. Everybody wore a mask.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot that was genuine. In fact, that's kind of what the hippie movement and the sexual revolution and all that stuff. That's kind of what that was a resistance against. It was resistance against the mask
Yeah.
and pulling the mask off. Um, what ended up coming out once the mask was off was also problematic in its own way, but nevertheless it was a step forward in that sense because for the first time people were actually saying what they felt and what they
Yeah.
thought rather than what they were programmed to think or what the leaders wanted them to say. It was what was actually coming from inside, and it scared people, it shocked people, and it was jarring because it was so different from what we were all used to. We were all
Hmm.
used to father knows best. Well, maybe not, but that was kind of like the feel of it.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I think it really does come down to this idea of programming. And I feel like some people are a little bit dismissive of that concept because it's so contrarian, but I also feel like it's valid to feel contrary to that. You have
Yeah,
to understand that, like, my mom would always say, like, there's three sides to a story, yours, mine, and the truth, right? And so if you're not questioning
I
it,
like that. That's good.
right? That was that was used a lot when I was a
I'm
child, and
sure.
I'm sure I
Yeah.
was exaggerating things. Um, but I think about it now even too, because to your point, there's so much more proliferation of these narratives that are there. Some of them are very valid, some of them are very
Mhm.
invalid, and we're trying to navigate that and figure out, like, well, what is the reality of the situation? Things that you're describing, Walt, are things that I feel today.
Yeah. Well, I'll take it a step further. For the longest time, I would divide the whole experience the kind of the way you just described. Some things are valid, some are invalid, and so forth. Over time, I've come to realize they were all valid. I didn't like some of them. Some of them I detested, but they were still valid
Yeah.
because
Well,
they
because
were
there's something
meaningful to
fun.
the people who expressed them.
You're
You
right.
know?
Yeah. It's the lens of reality that we all
Yeah.
look through. And what is reality? Even, I mean, that's like my little stoner brain being like, well, what is the meaning of life? Like, let's go there. But so, like, as somebody who felt like you were very much introverted when you were younger, like, and because of, sort of like you said, maybe a little bit of distrust in the world,
Mm.
do you feel like there was something, like a pivotal moment, that made you feel like you wanted to tap into your more extroverted side, or your more sort of connective human side, if it's not extroverted? Because I don't want to place that on somebody who is more introverted and be like, oh, well, you wanting to connect with people means you're extroverted, because it doesn't necessarily. It's the way that we want to interact with each other. Like, when did that switch flip for you?
Introversion is one of those complex topics because it can have so many different meanings for so many different people. So I'll define what it meant for me.
Okay,
For
great.
me, introversion was being afraid of talking with other people. It was being afraid of interacting with other people and doing
I
everything
love
I
that you've
could to
just
shield
wiped
myself.
that completely off the table with this show. You're like, we're not doing that anymore.
We tried to get at our truth as quickly as possible, whatever
Yeah.
that truth may be. But yeah, I mean, for me, that's what it was. And I think pretty early on, I wanted to get to the point where I could have genuine connection, where I could I could have genuine communication. I had no idea how to get there. I had no idea when I could get there. And it turned out to be more of an evolutionary process rather than having a pivotal moment. But I can certainly point to certain pivotal moments that happened in my life. I can think of one right off the top of my head because it's just kind of it's kind of seared in my brain. Because on my 13th birthday, Kent State occurred. The Kent State shootings occurred on my 13th birthday.
Wow.
That just kind of sticks with you. I don't
Mhm.
care who you are. If it's your birthday, you associate. It's just such a strong association.
Yeah.
And that was one of those really, really jarring events that when it happened, there were no answers. Nothing made any sense. Nothing. You couldn't connect to anything unless you were on the ground in those places, and then you could have some sort of narrative that you could tie into. But looking
Yeah.
at it through the news or whatever, it looked insane. It just looked like the world had gone insane.
Yeah.
And that's what I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I had not gotten to the point where I felt connection. I knew that on some level, probably about 15 levels deep, that I wanted connection. I had
Yeah.
no idea how to get there. So in the meantime, I'm just dealing with this series of events that was going on. And there were a lot of them. I mean, you have 68, the shootings and the convention. You got the Pentagon Papers. You got Watergate happening. You got the war in Vietnam. You've got the Kent State shootings. You got the anti-war rallies going on all over the place. You got the sexual revolution going on. You've got, I mean, it's like it's this cauldron of all this insanity going on.
It's
And
just like overstimulation to the max.
it is. It really is. It's totally overstimulation. I can only begin to think about what it would have been like if we had had social media at that time. And I say that because we really had very limited information flow.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I think one of the things that makes the world seem crazy is the massive amount of information flow. The stuff that's flowing informationally is actually not new. It's been going on for generations in all the different forms that it's playing out. It's just that now we're all directly exposed to it through the social media in a
Exposed
way
to it
that we
and
never
also
were before.
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say exposed to it for sure. And then also being given the opportunity to talk about it, right?
And that too, yeah.
The fact that we can communicate with other people in various parts of the world, living completely different experiences, but seeing things through these lenses of this is the media that they're being served, this is the media that we're being served, what's actually happening. You sort of have people who are almost like kind of in good faith trying to say, this is what's actually happening. Here's what you're seeing, but this is what's actually going on right now.
Mhm.
Now, there are people doing that on the flip side, and some of those things aren't actually real. But I think that idea that we can connect through social media, it's less about the social connection and the bonds I think that you're forming in certain ways. I think one-on-one interactions are more ideal for that, or listening
Mhm.
to a show and feeling connected to a message. But when you look at social media, it's the proliferation and the pervasiveness of these stories and these narratives that didn't exist in the time that you were talking about. And so it does feel a lot bigger. I think in some ways it probably is also bigger because of the connectivity, like actual digital connectivity and the way
Yeah.
things can grow. But I think to your point, it's like there was such a drastic shift and this mindset shift too, of like you can have all this information, so it's like it's nonstop. Also, it's like
Mhm.
there is no break from the news anymore, which is like you have to actively choose to not pay attention to it. And sometimes I legitimately need to. I need to like step away from it and be like, this is not
It's
okay. I can't.
healthy. Yeah, it's healthy to step away. And in fact, that is something that's missing because during that time, obviously, we did not have social media. So obviously, we did not have that constant flow of information like we have today. So what do human beings do when they have a limited amount of information? Well, the brains fill in the details.
Hmm.
That's what makes storytelling so effective. An effective storyteller doesn't try to tell you all the details. The storyteller tries to get you mentally in the place of what happened with the story and let your
Yes.
mind fill in all the details. Well,
Yes.
we were doing a lot of that. In fact, most of what was going on in our minds was exactly that because we had so little information. I mean, the stuff would literally trickle out. And then, okay, here's one more piece. Let's put that in the puzzle. Now, how does the puzzle look now? Did it
Oh, it's so
shift any? Did
crazy.
it, you don't have time for that today.
Yeah.
Now the stuff is coming in so fast. If you were to try to take time to do that, you'd have to basically turn off the social media for a week and go sit in a corner and just think about it.
Yeah. Which also, if I'm turning off the social media for a week, that's not what I'm doing. I'm like, I
Right,
actually am
exactly.
actively leaving that stuff behind. But then you come back and you're like, I've only been gone for a week. How has this much stuff happened?
That's
What?
right.
It's a balance.
It's a balance. It's also, it's about the internal connection too, because like we were saying before, the connections that I was reaching out for were based on the fact that I had gone inside to kind of hide from the fact that everything seemed unreal. But by the same token, when I am outreaching to find those new connections and making those new connections, and that's literally what the story of the podcast has been all about for me, just all these
Yeah.
connections I've been developing. But those new connections help me not only to see the world differently, but to process the world differently.
Mm,
And so, because of those connections, I'm able to handle that flow in a way I couldn't have handled 40 years ago. See, the connections that I had when I was growing up, you have a very limited set. You had maybe some people had more friends. Well, a lot of people had more friends than I did. But I had like 4 or 5 friends. That was my circle, so to speak, and that was it. That was my filter.
yeah.
I
No,
had
that's
nothing else to
interesting.
go with except for that filter, right?
Hmm.
But now, if I count all the people that I've met just through this podcast alone, I mean, we're talking hundreds of people that I have varying degrees of connection with, but nevertheless, the connections are there. Those connections, they explain things to me far more than that group of 5 could ever have done.
Right. Or even honestly, to your point, Walt, I love that you said that because I totally agree with you in my own experience. I've done fewer interviews on my show, but I feel the exact same way. And I love that you made the point about it hasn't just changed the way you view it, but the way you process it.
Yes.
Because I recognize within myself when faced with similar situations prior to having certain conversations on my show that there is a shift in how I approach
Yeah.
it. And I think that that's incredibly beautiful. I think that is the magic of
Mm.
human connection and what really
Yes.
brings us closer to one another because it's so easy to live in our little bubbles and to feel like this is the world as it exists for everybody when in truth it's the way that it exists for you right now in this moment. And even somebody who you're sharing time with,
Mhm.
we're on the mic together right now, we're in completely different parts of the world,
Right.
and we are looking at our reality through similar lenses because we're on this call together, but
Mhm.
it's also very different because we've had such different lived experiences. And
Right.
so there's no way for me to say like, oh, I know exactly what Walt's thinking right now and vice versa. And I feel like when you get to a place where you have these frequent conversations that are opening your mind and your heart and your belief system, then you start to, as you said, you get to fill in the details, but it's in a much more intentional way. It's not like you're
Mhm.
grasping to find like the pieces. It's more you're taking the data points and you're now processing them in a way that gives you a chance to cultivate your reality in a way that's most meaningful to you.
Yeah, I like that. That's true. And I love the distinction that you made because I can totally be on board with something that you say, but I can't know what's going on in your mind, even though I'm hearing you express what's going on in your mind at that particular
Right.
moment in time.
Right.
That's a really important distinction. That's
It's
really, really
weird to
important.
think about too, honestly. I feel like
Well, it
those are the
is.
moments where I'm
Yeah.
like, pause, wait a second, don't go there. It's
Yeah,
too
somehow my filter
much.
for that just kind of went away. I lost that filter years ago. Just
I
go there anyway, screw it.
love it.
But no, that distinction to me is really important. That distinction is the root, I think, to sanity. Because
Yeah.
when you can recognize that just because somebody is sharing something with you that you like, or perhaps sharing something with you that you don't like, doesn't mean you now have the handle on who that person is. You don't. There's a whole lot more to that person than what they're just saying in that moment.
I love that you just said that. So it reminds me of something that I saw a couple of weeks ago. It was maybe like a YouTube short or something, and it's not directly related to the type of information that we're talking about here, but I think it pertains in sort of an abstract way. And the person said, having a crush is just a lack of information. And so if you think of it as like you like somebody because of like what information you know about them,
Yeah,
forget it being a crush. It could be like you like somebody just as a
sure.
human being, right? And it's because you first met them and this is your a first impression is the lack of information. That's probably a better, more like wider range of explaining it. And so when you meet somebody and you're like, this is my feeling about them, this is what I believe about them, it's like we allow ourselves to sort of perpetuate this idea that the impression that we've gotten of this person is in fact who they are,
Mm,
and not actually like, I'm going to uncover more information to validate or invalidate that. We're just sort of like riding the wave as it's happening sometimes, and we perceive people to be different than they truly are. And I look at my last relationship, and that was like the ultimate example of being like, I've convinced myself that this person is this type of way, and this is what these things say about that person. But in reality, it was like, that's the narrative I'm telling myself about this person. That's not who they
mhm.
actually are. And I think we have to step back more frequently and ask ourselves if, like, what we're thinking about somebody, whether that's someone else or ourselves, is actually the truth, or if it's something that we've sort of conceived in our minds to satisfy that need for the narrative to flow a certain way.
I love that. I'll even take that a step further and say, to me, it becomes the basis for relationship.
Yeah.
Because if I can recognize moment to moment that I really don't know you, I simply know what you're sharing with me, then I can make it an adventure. Well, I wonder what the next thing is that Nikki's going to say, share
Yeah.
with me. Is it
Yeah.
something that I'm going to like? Is it something I'm going to disagree with? What's it going to tell me about her? Is it going to confirm something that I thought was true? Or is it going to show me, oh, wait a minute, there was another angle I hadn't thought about before? That's the
Yeah.
discovery process. To me,
Yeah.
that's the best part about a relationship.
I agree with you completely. That's so insightful, Walt. And it is. And whether it's friendships or romantic relationships, or even honestly relationships with our families, because as
Sure.
I've gotten older, and especially since losing my mom, my dad's in my relationship has changed drastically. It was never that we had a bad relationship. My dad has always loved me. I've always loved him. I've always known that. But losing my mom kind of forced us to both realize that we needed to have different dialogues, because my mom
Mm,
wasn't there to be part of the conversation anymore. So now
yeah.
it's like, well, who are you, man? Like, what's your story? Because
Mhm.
my mom, much like me, was the talker, and turns out my dad's actually quite a bit of a talker. I just didn't know.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. So I think, he and my mom must have been having great conversations that I was just not privy to. They were married for almost 40 years. But I think about it, and it's sort of like you get to know all these different parts of people also based on the time in your life and the circumstances around them. And as devastating as the loss of my mom is, and or was and still is, what I'm grateful for in that is recognizing that there was so much more opportunity for my dad's and my relationship to grow, and for
Mhm.
us to see more of each other, and to be less, guarded in the things that we feel we can expose and share to each other. And so for me, that's been like a really interesting journey on within the family dynamic.
It's really remarkable to me how exactly what you just described. We go through these traumas, and losing your mom is certainly a major trauma.
Yeah, for sure.
And yet, out of that trauma, look at the beauty that has come out of it. I mean, became immensely closer to your father because you
Yeah.
both perceived, oh, we really need to do this,
Yeah.
and it was both of you at the same time,
And
or
it was
maybe not
innate,
exactly the
right?
same time, but yeah, right. It was
Yeah.
built in. Yeah,
Yeah, and I would say yes, to confirm what you said. I do think it was pretty much around the same time, and
it
I
was okay.
also hear my dad being much more open-minded to things that I want to share with him, or things that I think could help him on his personal journey, because he
Mm,
started going to therapy after losing my mom, which, to be honest, I was not sure that he would, and I really was hoping he would. And he, as being in the baby boomer generation, as I'm sure you've experienced with plenty of people in your life, like there can sometimes be a resistance to certain conversations, and not
You
that there weren't
think?
resistance at every level, but like,
I mean, whatever gave you that
say it
idea?
delicately, I didn't know. But but
Welcome to
I
my life.
right. I'm like, what is it like for you to have those conversations with people? Man, I can't imagine. Because to me, it's like they're like, you're a millennial, like get over yourself. Um, but I think that,
What is it with that? I don't understand where people come from when they're saying
thank you.
I just don't get it. What's that all about?
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like, okay, so my wife and I have a theory on this. It's like, and I'm sure this isn't just us, but I think that, a lot of people, when we look at our families generationally, I kind of give this equation sometimes, or this example sometimes, is like So baby boomers, your parents were basically like the silent generation. Like they went through the depression. They were like,
Oh yeah.
whatever you need to do to like make your life okay, you do that. You make sure you're good, and then you can
Right.
help other people, but make sure you're good.
Right.
And I think that that sort of cultivated a generation of people who are also kind of, as you said, there were a lot of masks, and the phrase that my wife often uses it. It's like the keeping up with the Joneses idea, right?
Yeah.
Like you gotta have the thing or be the way that everybody wants you to be. And so it kind of, and my mom would have even said, like, children were to be seen and not heard.
Oh yes. It's so true. It was so
And
true. We even
you
had
know
our
what?
own table. I mean, we didn't even get to
Right?
sit at the same table. We had a different table.
Blows my mind. And I think that that idea, is that you sort of lose the connection in the
Mm,
relationship that you have with people there. And um, I think, because our parents were of that generation, part of them was like, we want you to have things that we didn't have. We want you to be able to
mm,
express yourselves in the ways that we weren't able to. But then when
mhm.
you do that, it's a little bit like, why are you doing that? Why are you like that? And we're like, because you wanted us to be. And it's like, well, now that you're challenging us, I'm not so sure that we like that about you.
Which is
Um,
ironic because that's exactly something that a baby boomer should recognize because that's exactly what we were doing.
1,000%. And this is the thing too, is that I find really comical because of the way that the generations have played out, and looking at the 60s to like the 2020, like the late 20 teens and early 2020s, it's like there is so much similarity that it's like, if anything,
Mhm.
we should be relating more to each other and
Yes.
trying to empathize.
Yes. Yes. It's an ongoing thing that has gone on generation after generation. The generations that follow are smarter, they're more aware, they're more focused in on what's currently going on.
Well, that's a big, big part of it, right? Like you're
And that's been
hungering.
true every single generation has been like that.
Yeah.
There's never been an exception to my knowledge. Now, maybe if you go back 10 generations, you can find an exception. I don't know. But
Right.
as far as I know, that's always been the case.
And that's
And
not well documented at that point. So who knows?
well, this is true. Yeah, that there is that. So again, there's that inference being filled in. But we'll just go with the idea that
I'm
the
going to
inference is
assume we've
accurate.
gotten smarter and a little bit better as human beings,
I
although
think
we
so. You
feels like
know,
we're where it's like there's this desire to hold on to what was because nostalgia and familiarity and all of those things. But one of the things that I really appreciate as an elder millennial in particular is being part of sort of the cycle breaking generation,
hmm
where I think that kind of crosses over into Gen X as well. So people who are slightly older than me. And you look at Gen Z and my niece and nephew who are like 3 and 5, and they're, going to be the next generation of people who are trying to hopefully make a difference in a world that still exists. And I look at the people who are younger than me, and they're really fighting for the things that they believe in. And I see in them what I believe you were witness to in the 60s and the early 70s, where it's like, we need to change this. It's not okay. We need to change this. Whereas I think my generation was sort of bred to be a little complacent and complicit, where it was like, the system's fine. It's operating as expected. And then, like, all of a sudden shit went down, and we were like, ooh, we should have been paying more attention, huh? And so I think that there's sort of a dynamic shift in like our generation looking at the younger generation being like, yes, please do the things that we didn't do or didn't know to do. Whereas I think millennials are sort of like seen as, you're the ones who are trying to change everything, and because you have the technology or you're entitled or whatever. And I'm like, I graduated in 2008 and the economy had just crashed. So I don't really know that I felt super entitled to a lot of things.
Which, by the way, I have a lot of empathy for because I graduated in 1980 at the peak of inflation.
Okay,
So
so
I had a very similar experience. Yeah, I know exactly how that feels. Yeah,
And
and
it's
plus,
like,
plus my
oh,
business got wiped out in 2008, so I got both of them.
oh man, man. See, well, and it's just further proving though that it's all cyclical, right? And
Yeah.
I think that what we're desperate for right now when we think about this in relation to the idea of connection is, I just had this really amazing conversation with a guest, Jose Leal, and he is one of the co-founders of this company, Radical Purpose. And the idea is that we need to shift the way that we think about how we organize together to create more valuable results for businesses, but not for the sake of the organization itself, but for the sake of us as the people who are collaborating to make the world a better place through business, through philanthropy, and all of these things. And the only real way to do that, and he's like, it's not to tear down these massive businesses that have already kind of left the station, right? It's to start at the origin of new businesses and say, like, how do we do this in a way that doesn't become corrupt, that gives people a chance to show up and play to their strengths? And I think that that is something that like can only happen as we're going through this journey and progressing into different like mindsets as younger generations come in, because you see them being more community based, wanting to rally around social causes. And I feel like I grew up in the 90s and man, I wasn't paying attention to any of that. Like it just wasn't top of mind.
I hear what you're saying, and by the way, I love the way you were expressing the idealism of it because I think that's wonderful. I think it's fair to say that no matter what approach a person or a group or a generation takes, it's going to corrupt itself over time. That's just going to be a given. It's going to happen. So, are we going to be okay with that? That's the first question. Can we be okay with the fact that it's not going to come out the way we expected?
Well, I'm
Be-
because nothing's really predictable.
It really isn't, you know. In fact, it actually you can predict that it's not going to come out the way you had in
Right.
mind.
Yeah.
It's
That's
fairly
true.
safe
Yeah.
to assume that's not going to work out that way, right? So let's just be okay with that as step one.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not going to come out what I had. Maybe it's going to be something better. I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah.
So once I've got step one done, now step two in my mind becomes okay. Well, since I know it's not going to come out perfect, then what do I want to try to do anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Where
Yeah.
where do I want to try to go? Where's my passion lie? What is it
Yes.
that really drives me? Because passion, I think, is what really drives the world.
I agree.
I mean, if you have a passion for something and you're willing to follow through on it in to whatever degree you're willing to, even if it's only to a small degree, in whatever way you're willing to do it, that produces the best results. Even as it becomes corrupted, it still produces the best results.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too because I think passion and purpose often go hand in hand. Um, I I said to my wife yesterday, I think I'm just realizing that if something doesn't drive towards my purpose or provide some form of like soothing or emotional regulation, like I'm just not really interested in it. And that might be the entitled millennial coming out in me. Um, like as I said,
We'll save the topic entitled for a moment because I want to bring that one in too. But go ahead.
but I think that, you know, for me, it's like the podcast and these conversations and sharing this message of the importance of human connectivity and the gratitude that we have for that connectivity is the thing that I am most compelled by in my life. But there are also little things that I can do from like an e-commerce perspective where I'm like, oh, I'll like make these designs and I'll sell these. And it's just, you know, something that regulates me emotionally. It's nice to have some passive income, great. But where I find myself grappling and feeling the least authentic is when I'm pigeonholing myself into a role that is like because I'm good at it or because that's what you're supposed to do. And it's like if we do,
That
right?
was me. That was me.
If we just do what we think we're supposed to do, then we're not going to be happy unless the passion, as you said, or the purpose intersects with that idea of what you were supposed to do actually also so happens to be this thing that gives you
That's
some sort
wonderful
of
when that
joy,
happens. Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's
Great.
rare, but it's wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah. But
yeah.
I
I
also think
totally
it's
agree with
wonderful to like recognize that that's not what you want and to find your own path. I just think it's more grueling at times.
that. I love that you mentioned entitlement. That's why I want to bring that one back in.
Please
I
do.
know my generation and the Gen X generation come down on millennials on this whole entitlement thing, and I want to share with you my take on entitlement, because from where I sit, entitlement means I'm entitled to something and you're not. And so
Yeah.
therefore, if what you feel you're entitled to is different from what I feel I'm entitled to, you must be wrong and I must be right.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what the whole complaint about entitlement is really all about. You're not behaving the way I think you should behave.
Yes, yeah, oh, 100%. No, and this is the whole issue too with like being a millennial of a baby boomer is like, but you're the ones who told me to like be strong, stand up for yourself, do what's
Yeah.
right for you, do what, you know,
Mhm.
the like do something that serves you and serves your
Yeah.
soul and not serves you in like a very selfish way, but be who you are. Like I do think that my parents encouraged me throughout my entire life to be who I am. They provided love and support, but man, I will tell you, when you challenge them on something that they don't want you to challenge them on, it
Mhm.
is like, do you remember what you taught me, right? You remember why I'm
Right.
like this because I am
Yeah,
in fact your child. And my dad would say,
exactly.
he's like, you and your mom butt heads a lot because you two are so similar. And I'm like, because she was one of the people, Walt, in the 60s who was pushing back. She was one of the, like, I don't want to be like first women in the world, right? But she went to college and her goal was to have a career.
Mhm.
She, before her dad passed away, she said he had told her, "You're never going to get married. You're too stubborn. Like, you're just
Oh,
not
wow, yeah.
like," and she was like, "I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life than alone in a marriage." And she was doing really well for herself.
Mhm.
And, you know, she met my dad shortly after her father passed away. And it's like, she knew the life that she wanted and she went
Right.
after it when she, and the thing that she would always say to me is, you know, she went to a 2-year college because that was pretty common when it was in the 60s. And so she said so many women went for their MRS. They were going because it
Mhm.
qualified them more to be a wife, not that they were trying to make a career for themselves. And so
Mhm.
it's like she was sort of rebel tendency
Sure.
and, you know, I'm going to go put myself out there and I'm going to do the thing that's right for me and helps make the world a better place and does this and does that. And it's like, so I was encouraged to do that. But when it comes to having that discussion with each other about something that I'm challenging them on, it's like, I don't.
I hear you, and I'll take it a step further because I already defined how I believe that entitlement is really about that I don't approve of what you're doing.
Yeah,
But I'll take it a step further by saying that everyone is entitled.
I agree with you completely on that.
There's actually
Yes.
no human being who is not entitled. And I also like to take issue with the idea of selfishness being a bad thing. I think selfishness is a very good thing. And
We agree on that
we agree on
wholeheartedly
that. Okay, so
because
yeah.
I think that there's a difference between sort of a malicious selfishness, something that's self-serving and intended to help
Mm.
you succeed, whatever that looks like, while pushing other people down. I think that
Which is entitlement based upon fear.
yes, I mean, well, because it's like that idea of what's mine is mine. And it
Yes.
can only be mine. And if you have more, that means I have less. And you're like, that's not actually how it works. Um, and I think to that end, you know, the idea of selfishness is also in a lot of ways it's self-care, it's self-love, it's the
Mhm.
things that you need to give yourself to be a productive person and member of society, to be a whole person and to allow yourself to meet those needs. And I actually said this in the episode I released yesterday is like, and it was something that I needed to hear in the moment yesterday too when I was putting it out. It's like, if your needs aren't being met, then ask yourself why they're not being met. And I think that when you look at this sort of discrepancy in the generation, sometimes it's like, if you're mad that other people have this thing, why are you mad about that? Like, what is it
Yes.
that's upsetting to you about that? Is
Mhm.
it that you don't have it? And, or like my dad will say things sometimes where it's like, I don't think that he's bitter about it, but I think he's kind of got the old school mindset of like, well, that's not what it was like when I
Mm.
was that age or when this was happening. And I'm like, yes, but you can't be upset at people for shifting with the times because you've done that, you know?
Well,
So
sure you
it's sort of
can.
like,
There's no rule that says that we can't be hypocrites. Of course we
that's
can be
fair. Okay, that's
hypocrites.
fair. That's fair. It's a little unreasonable to be
Oh,
mad
okay.
about it when like if he were growing up now and these opportunities were presented to him,
Mhm.
wouldn't he take them? He
Yeah,
would,
I
because
would
that's
think.
what you do. You
Yeah,
evolve.
yeah, yeah, and that actually leads to the third point I wanna make about entitlement. We've already laid out, that everybody is entitled and that nobody really escapes from that. I take it to a third level by saying entitlement is a good thing. There's actually nothing wrong with being entitled.
Mhm. Well, I think it's like the idea of what I agree with you because I think that the idea of entitlement, we look at it as like you've put yourself on a pedestal and now you are entitled to this because of XYZ. And it's like, no, as human beings, we have a right, right? And like that entitlement, the meaning of it really should be that you are entitled to have your opinion. You are entitled to have a good job. You are entitled to have, you know, meaningful connections and relationships. Like as a human being, these are sort of rights that you should have in your life. And we've put this word entitlement around it as if, how dare you?
I would actually say that entitlement is an inalienable right. And the reason I say inalienable is you can't alienate yourself from it. It's really not possible to do.
Yeah.
And if you try to do it, that's actually where you get yourself in trouble.
Yeah.
That's the fear side of entitlement. The fear, I can have this, nobody else can have this, whatever the this might be. That's the fear side. And that fear side is the one that is basically preventing you from getting where you want to be.
Yeah. And preventing
From what you
other
want in
people
life.
from getting where they could go too.
Actually, it doesn't. That's what's so interesting about it. It
Okay,
really
all right.
doesn't.
Go
Everybody
there.
can be entitled. Everybody can be entitled. It doesn't matter what it is they're entitled about. Ultimately, what happens is that if your particular form of entitlement leads you to closing off that way, you're the one who loses.
I mean,
No one
that's
else
true.
really loses. The only reason that somebody else loses is because they disapprove of the fact that you're entitled in that way. So they start kind of closing themselves off. So really, and the negative side of entitlement isn't that entitlement is bad. It's that we keep closing ourselves off because we keep pointing the finger of blame at somebody else.
I agree and probably disagree a little bit on
Okay.
this. And I will
Cool.
say
We
why.
finally found something we could disagree with.
Because
Everything's been agreement so far. Like, oh my God, we
but
found something.
challenge it though, but it's foundationally, I understand what you're saying and I agree with you. The part that I think is hard for me is I look at the way the world has evolved and the disparity. Particularly my brain goes like wealth gap, right? It's like it's just unreasonable. And these people who are these like multi-billionaires who are like just so hell-bent on more money equals more power, that sense of it's not even entitlement, honestly. I think it's like righteousness. It is that them having more does equate to other people having less. And I don't think that it necessarily means that, as somebody, so I used to work at Amazon in corporate. So this is like where my head went initially. It's like you have Jeff Bezos here who has like more money than anybody ever needs in a lifetime, moving bridges in Amsterdam so his yacht can go through. And then you've got people like, what is your life? But then you have like people in the warehouses or delivery drivers who like don't get bathroom breaks, can't do these things. And it's like, but their life circumstances have dictated that, this is the means that they have to employment or whatever it might be. And I'm not saying that those people might not be able to find a path out or do something differently. Like they hopefully can and have more means to do that, but not everybody does. And so I think when there's such a gap like that, it's hard for me to fully agree with what you're saying, even though I think foundationally you're absolutely correct. I think that the way the system's built, it is on the backs of people who are not able to reap the benefits because of the power dynamics that exist and need to basically be shattered. But that's an entirely more complicated conversation.
Well, that's right. Let's go. We like rabbit holes around here. Rabbit holes are fun. So let's go down this particular rabbit hole because I like this one. I totally get what you're saying. And in fact, I think that one of the things we talk about here a lot is resistance because we're talking about law of attraction so often. And resistance is a big portion of why am I not getting what I want? Well, because I'm resisting in some way. The resistances that exist in this world are in all cases they're created by us, but like you point out, some of them are so big and institutionalized. I mean, they're kind of ingrained that they seem overwhelming, and so we feel overwhelmed by them.
Yeah.
So while I can, on the one hand, say, well, yeah, we're the ones creating all this for ourselves. That's a far cry from saying I know exactly how to climb out of that because I often don't. I'm often trying to figure out how the hell am I going to get out of this mess? That's all of us, right? That we're all doing that. So the guy who's working in the warehouse, he's got a whole bunch of resistances that he's built up through. He's gotten a lot of help building them up. He got them from his parents and from his friends and from his associates and his teachers and his employers. I mean, he's all these people feeding in all these different resistances, and he's a good neuro person, so he takes it into his neural system and he just puts them all into place, and now he's got all these resistances in place. He's the one to put him there. But by the same token, it feels like, oh my God, I am so overwhelmed by this thing. What the heck can I do? So when I frame it that way, then I say to myself, well, that gives us all kinds of opportunities, doesn't it? Because for those of us who like to figure out ways to break through those kinds of resistances, well, we can jump in and say, well, I figured out this one. I'm going to share it with the world. And here are a bunch of people, including this guy who's working at Amazon, who might benefit from that. Oh, this is great. Okay. Got a new way to break through on that particular resistance. Or if I'm somebody who's perhaps one of the creators of the resistances, right? And then life comes at me and slaps that resistance back in my face for the hypocrite that I am. Like, oh my God, now I got to deal with the fact that I just been putting this together for all this time. We get all these opportunities to grow. That's what these
Yeah.
really are. They're all opportunities to grow. And
Yeah.
sometimes we grow, sometimes we choose not to. But those times that we do, this is what I love most about my podcast. I have learned so many different ways that people have risen from traumatic situations, from scary situations, self-imposed jails, I mean, you name it, and created mind-boggling change in their own lives.
Oh, 100%.
Massive improvements.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is we can look at it a couple ways. We can say, yeah, there's this horrible structure where everybody's feeling so tied up, so closed in by a system. And then I can also point at, wow, look at the way people are breaking free of it.
Oh,
Not
I love that.
everybody, but there are some people who really are saying, screw this.
Yeah.
Screw this model. Screw this situation. I'm going to break through anyway. And they do. They
Yes.
do.
It's such a good point, Walt. I'm so glad that you said that too, because when you started, I was a little bit like, okay, where are you going to go with this? And you're right, because I do think that there are systems that are built to hold people back, keep them down, allow the rich to grow richer and more powerful, because really it's not even about the money. Money is a construct, blah, blah, blah. But the reason they want the money is because it gives them the power. The people who are in
And the reason they want the power is because they're afraid, by the way. I'm just
1,000%. I mean, this is another episode on like how they need to heal their child wounds. Like,
love it.
I think about this a lot.
I can tell, yeah.
But I think that, you make a really good point too, is that we do hold ourselves back in a lot of ways. And frankly, I think about like my recent departure from tech and the anxiety that I've had. I was just talking to one of my best friends about this, about abundance and thinking through that lens, because we both left our tech jobs and decided to go all in on ourselves. And that is a scary place to be. You are leaving a nice chunk of salary behind that a lot of people are not fortunate enough to have in their lifetime. But I didn't get that by not trying, right? Like I graduated in 2008. I started my first job making less than, I think, maybe $12 an hour. Gas was $5 a gallon. I was traveling 100+ miles round trip. Like I was not even paying for what I couldn't afford my gas with what I was getting paid. And I was at a point where, I kept switching jobs every couple of years because I was like, I just need to find a way to make more money. And so I honed my skill set and I moved jobs and I would make more money and I did all that. And then I got to this point where I was like, okay, this is the point of diminishing returns. Yes, I could keep making this money. Yes, I could keep making more money if I wanted to, but I'm not going to be happy doing that. And so like the thing that I'm resisting is that pull towards my purpose. And the reason I'm resisting that is because I'm afraid of the lack of stability, because graduating during the recession was really scary. There weren't jobs. I couldn't get anything. And at the time I didn't have a skill set. So this younger part of me is going, well, you have nothing if you don't have this job, right? But that's not true anymore, because now I have 15 years of experience and I have the credentials that can go with it. Should this venture that I'm on now like take a turn, then I can go back into an industry and do something that I need to do. But if I continue to resist this pull towards my purpose, then I'm going to continue to be unhappy no matter how much money I make, because like there's something within me going, that's not meant for you. And so you have to identify like what feels right, what doesn't feel right. And like you said, it doesn't always happen like, overnight. You have to go through those ebbs and flows of your evolution.
Never does, actually.
Right. And find that path. And I think that can be really hard. And I think for a lot of people, it's probably seems really inconceivable to be able to escape like the grind the way that it is. And I will say, that the thing that I find really inspirational now is that there are so many content creators who are trying to help other people figure out ways to get out of that grind and do something for themselves. And I know how passionate my wife is, having been an entrepreneur her whole life, that she's like, I just want to help people who feel like there's no way out, understand that they can do something for themselves the way the world exists today.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, beautifully stated. Really beautifully stated. I'm also thinking about something else too. When you've been in this life, when you've been in this world long enough, things start to become clearer after time. For me, from very young age, player in this resistance. We got two blips. All right. Are we connected there?
Yep.
Okay. I think we're back. It's like, whoa, where did it all go? All right.
If you've been in this world long enough.
Yes, right. Well, if you've been in this world long enough, once you realize that technological issues happen, and there's an example of it. But no, what I was going to say is, if you've been in this world long enough, you begin to realize that the dreams that you had that you thought you had to give up come back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I've been experiencing very early in my life, in my 20s particularly. I became aware of the role the monetary system plays, and I actually developed an interest in it that most people would consider to be sick, because I was just so focused on it. And I didn't have any solutions. In fact, the more that I delved into it, the more I realized exactly how it was failing us, and exactly how the thing that was failing us was going to basically keep it in place. So I didn't see how to fix it. I saw a lot of potential solutions being offered. I knew none of them were really going to do it. And so I kind of had to leave it behind, in part because I just needed to, for my own self-preservation, for my own self-development. I had to be able to move on with my life and do things. Only in the last couple of years, I just stumbled on something that I think becomes I guess you could call it a model for how to shift the whole thing. Not by banning it, not by some sort of governmental action, not by some movement or something like that, but simply through a human behavior pattern that's a new pattern. And let me describe what I have in mind for that. Now, there are lots of ways this could play out, but this is the one that I've come up with for myself. A couple of years ago, I came up with an idea for how to help people who are Facebook group admins. And for people who know about Facebook groups, they're usually created by the people who are the admins. And if you've never been a Facebook group admin, you don't fully grasp just how messed up Facebook really is, how bad their security is, and how abused admins are. I don't think most people genuinely get that, but a Facebook group admin really gets the worst of all possible worlds for the privilege of creating this topic, that they are passionate about, and then actually following it through, and doing all the policing and all that kind of stuff. So I was asking myself, how can we help Facebook group admins? And the first answer that came to my mind is, well, pay them. Okay, pay them with what? Where's the money going to come from? And I said, well, Facebook's all about advertising. How about advertising? And then as I started to explore that, I won't do the whole thing. I'll do this as a larger episode at one point, because this is a project I'm working on. But the short version is, I recognized that Facebook wasn't going to do anything about it. They were making money off of it. They liked it the way it was. But there was an interesting little anomaly. They don't advertise in a Facebook group. They advertise in your timeline. They advertise in your stories. They advertise in all this other stuff, but they don't advertise in Facebook groups. I said, why do they do that? That's kind of odd. And as I delved into it even deeper, I recognized that there was a reason that I only have a glimpse of it, but I think I have like the outlines of it, which is it provides legal protection for them. And the reason I say that is, under U.S. labor law, as I understand it, it is illegal for a for-profit corporation to earn a profit from volunteer labor. Well, that's exactly what a Facebook group administrator is. That's volunteer labor. So how do you justify it? Well, I don't know exactly how they've done it, but I think the gist of it is they kind of treat the Facebook groups like their own little entities that are kind of pseudo-owned by the administrator.
Yeah.
So it's like a separate chunk of Facebook. So I said, well, wouldn't it be really cool if we could create a way to provide a way for them to sell advertising in their own groups that they can make money off of? And that's the project I'm working on right now. I have software developers who are creating that kind of thing. Now, I'll probably at some point get the ire of Facebook once Facebook figures out what it is that I'm trying to do. But if I can kind of stay under the radar for quite some time, I think we can actually make some pretty great headway on that. And wouldn't it be great? They call it side hustles now. We just used to call them side incomes, but they call them side hustles. Wouldn't it be great if I could help create over 1 million side hustles, helping people get side incomes that they never had before? Or maybe it starts expanding beyond that. Maybe it's 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion. Imagine 1/7 of the planet or 1/8 of the planet having side hustles of this kind. Imagine what that does to the monetary system. Right. The monetary system, remember, is dependent upon a fixed labor pool. What if the labor pool is taken away?
Well, that's it. Yeah. I mean, that's the fear, right? That's the biggest challenge, I think, to corporations right now, to your point, Walt, is people's side hustles turning into their full-time hustles.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, that's exciting.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
I
Of course
love
it is
that.
because it means you can break free from the system, but still like, I mean, you still have a dependence on the system, right? Like these companies have ingrained themselves into our lives and we need to, Amazon's another great example, right? Like
Mhm.
it's not going anywhere. AWS, like the web services side of it, like they're doing what they're doing, they're making money, whatever.
Yeah,
But like, why can't it be both? Like
it
there
can be.
is an opportunity. And I think that this is where you get into the idea of what I was saying before, sort of around like how newer companies need to be constructed with less of sort of the historic hierarchical model and more like what does it look like for your business to grow sort of like in a ripple effect manner instead of like you're just getting this
Mhm.
instruction from down at the top and this is what you have to do. And the guest that I had on said that worked well when people were getting pulled in from the fields into factories and you needed somebody to say, hey, this is what you have to do here and now. But when you have more control over what your output is and you can be more independent and more autonomous, then why would we not support people doing that, especially if everybody can be contributing and making money off of it. Like it's
Yeah.
at that point, it's like you have to hopefully you can find a way like you're trying to do to create that benefit for the people who are playing in that gray area because if you can't then it sort of lends itself to the and not you personally but in general if we can't do that then it makes it harder to sustain those other things and that like you eventually end up sort of crumbling to the system and being like well I don't have time or bandwidth or I'm not getting paid to do this so I have to go here and do that where I am getting paid.
And I think the key word that you used there was gray area, because the gray area is another word for the leading edge.
Yeah.
And that's what this is. This is leading edge.
Yes,
And
I
the,
love
the
that.
one thing you can always, there's one thing you can always be sure of where the leading edge is concerned. It's always expanding. It never contracts. The
Yes.
leading edge never gets smaller. It always gets bigger.
Yes.
And that's pretty reliable. I mean, if I really sat down, I might be able to find an exception to it, but it's pretty rare. Historically, the leading edge is always expanding outward. So, in order to, if what your desire is to avoid um, falling off that leading edge, it's actually fairly simple. You just say, "I'm going to just keep doing leading edge stuff. I'm
Yep.
just going to keep. I'm not going to fall for that fear stuff because the fear stuff is resistance anyway.
I mean, that's
So
where I'm
I'm just
living
not
right
going to go
now,
there.
honestly.
Yeah,
I feel like I this is the like negotiation I was having with myself earlier today. I was like, and through my conversation with my friend yesterday, I was just like, I know that I need to differentiate myself because the way that other people are doing it isn't the thing that I want to do. But I'm also trying to navigate. Sorry, my dog's like shaking in the background.
that's right.
Um, but I think part of what I'm trying to figure out and what we all are kind of trying to do in our own right is like, well, what's the thing that feels right to me that's also allowing me to be on that leading edge, giving me a chance to sort of explore past what I see and into what I believe is possible.
And the cool part is any of us can be on that leading edge.
Yes,
There's not a rite of passage. There's no ticket you have to buy.
right.
There's no requirement. There's no MBA you have to get. There's no
You just
particular
have to do
degree.
it.
You just go there. It's like there's the edge. Are you ready? Here it is. Let's go.
I said this to myself in the mirror today. I'm not going to lie. I
Did you
was like,
really?
the only difference between you and other people who are doing it is that they're already doing it. Just
You're doing
do
it.
it.
Yes.
It's not that hard, but it's like, but it is. There's something in there that's like we wrap ourselves around some pre-existing belief or whatever it might be that we have to work through to be able to get to that place where you're like, okay, now I'm free from that limiting belief and I can actually get there. So I feel like the first step is acknowledging that you have a problem and then you can work through it.
It's mindset shift. That's exactly what it is. It's learning to shift your mindset. And probably the first thing there is recognizing that you have a mindset. If you
Yes,
recognize you have a mindset, now you know where you're shifting from. Okay.
100%.
Now you have a position. You have a position in the three-dimensional space that we're working in. Okay.
Yes,
Great.
yes,
You got a position. Now where are you going to go with it? It's
yes.
over there. There, just go over there.
And it's like sitting with it too, right? Because I think part of what I recognize with myself and what I do resist is that I resist the discomfort, which I know is not super productive. But then when
Oh
I
yeah.
sit with it and I'm like, what is it that I want? I think sometimes going in with an expectation of what you're going to get out of it is limiting. And what I
100%.
need to do is go in with like an open mind and think, okay, whatever comes out of this comes out of this. And this is what you were saying earlier. So it really did kind of come full circle, right? Is like,
Yeah.
it's whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Control the things that you control in the ways that make sense, but don't assume that like what you're trying to do is going to net the exact result that you're going for.
That's right. That's exactly right. So you don't worry about you don't sweat the details. You don't sweat the
Yeah.
little stuff. You don't sweat all the stuff that, is going to go wrong and it's going to get contorted and distorted and contracted and all this other crazy stuff. It's going to happen. Let it go. Fine.
Yep.
I mean, Jeff Bezos, you mentioned Jeff Bezos. He has one of the most healthy attitudes on this of anybody I know. He knows for a fact that within 35 years, Amazon is going to be beaten out by somebody. I mean, there is an honest, accurate description of what's going to happen. He knows
I mean,
it.
it's probably easier to have that feeling when you're like, well, it's cool though, because I don't
Well,
really
you're a
need that to
gazillionaire. Yeah,
matter.
that's true. Yeah, but it's accurate. He knows. I mean,
Right.
that's just facing the reality of it. He knows it's going to fall apart at some point.
It's confidence.
Yeah.
It's like it's a confidence in what is inevitable also, and I think
Mhm.
that is valid. I think that the more that we get in touch with, like you said, the reality that some things will fail or not go as we expect, then it gives us more freedom to kind of play with
Yes.
what could
Yes.
be, instead of feeling like we're confined to what our expectation is. And in my own experience, and I see it with other people too, is like we set an expectation, and if that expectation's not met, we see it as a failure, and it's not a failure. It's life. So much of life is the experiment.
It's a skill also, a skill of learning how to embrace the failure and say, yes, one more thing that I learned from. Yes, one more thing that, yeah, it was painful, but boy, did I learn a bunch out of that.
Yes. The most impactful learning experiences in my life have been the most difficult. So you're 100%.
It really piss you off, but it's true.
Oh yeah. No, you're like, that's crap. I can't believe that's how we have to navigate this. But at the end of the day, it's those moments that really shape our perspective. And like you said earlier in the conversation, it's also the dialogues that we have with other people who have gone through similar or different experiences that show us, this is
That's right.
how human resilience works. And the power of that is that we get to acknowledge the things that are going to help us grow. And when we take the lead in our own life, then, I think the possibilities are just so they're endless in relation to like what our means are, is what I'll say, because I know not everybody has like the same jumping off point. But I do believe that if you're passionate, as you said, and you're willing to grow and change and understand that you're going to have those failures, then at the end of the day, you're going to find yourself on a much happier path. And that doesn't necessarily mean wealth. Wealth is not what creates happiness. Wealth creates security, and security can often help us feel more at ease and safer. But at the end of the day, like, are you happy? Do you have joy in your life? Do you have gratitude in your life? Regardless of all the other things that are going on, like those things will help you navigate the harder parts and get back to
Yeah, they do.
those other
And
pieces of your life.
they also help you to understand a new way of understanding what wealth is too. You start expanding your idea of what wealth is. It becomes beyond just dollars and cents.
For sure.
And
That's a really
wealth
fair point.
becomes, there's a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of understanding. And when you
Yes.
take all those wealths and put them together, wealth becomes an entirely different topic.
Well, and wealth
It
of
becomes
connection, to your point,
Yeah.
the abundance
Yeah.
of connection that you and I have created through our shows and just relationships overall. It's like that has had much more of a tangible impact on my life than the amount of money I've earned.
I got to tell you, Nikki, we loved having you on the show last time. I know Jody Lynn was, really upset she couldn't join us today. I think this episode was even better. I mean, we just went off on this exploration that was just that was like fly to the moon and back again. This was really great.
I love it. I'm so glad. I had such a great time. I'm so bummed Jody Lynn wasn't able to be here, but you know what? What I will say to that in the vein of the conversation is, I feel like it strengthened our connection and gave us more opportunity to kind of dive into those parts of ourselves. And you know what? I really appreciate you all, and I'm so glad I was able to join.
I love that you could join us, Nikki. Totally appreciate you as well. Best of luck continuing with the Who the Fuck podcast. I love the name, the Who the Fuck podcast. I mean, come on.
I feel like it's controversial for some people, but the thing that I will say is that the premise behind it is really like, who am I and why am I the way that I am? And the phrase itself is rarely used. It's just more of the it's the identifier of like that deep introspection that we are all kind of trying to navigate that question in life.
Well, also, it has a shock value too. I mean, let's be honest. You put that
helps.
word in there because there's a shock value. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Well, what's going on here?
It was really the question I asked myself. I was like, what's happening right now? I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Well, hey, you asked the right question. You get the right answer. You certainly got the right answer. So
yeah,
thanks once again
absolutely.
for joining me today. This has been really, really fun.
For
And
sure.
we'll
Well,
we'll,
thank you
we'll have to
so
figure out
much.
some way to keep this connection going because I mean I'm loving this kind of conversation. I just
Oh,
love it.
absolutely, absolutely. I would love to have you on the show, if you're ever doing guest spots.
Sure.
So happy to arrange that, and we'll shoot over some
Oh,
info and
absolutely.
get
I
that
love
going.
doing guest spots. Yeah. Yeah. Let's reciprocate.
Perfect.
No problem.
Amazing. Let's do it.
All right. So thank you, Nikki. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.